Welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having a positive conversation with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Chandana Ekanayake, a co-founder, studio and creative director at Outerloop Games, creator of Falcon Age and the upcoming Thirsty Suitors. Hi Chandana, how are you doing today?
Good, Link. How are you?
I'm doing all right, thanks so much for asking. Now, before we get into this, just to help anyone that might not know a whole lot about you, would you mind introducing yourself and maybe giving a little bit of, who you are, what you do?
Sure. I've been making games for a long time, about 25 years. I started at 19 at a studio called Bethesda Games. You probably heard of it. On the East Coast. That's where I grew up. I grew up in Maryland, where Bethesda is. But before that, I was born in Sri Lanka. I moved to the States when I was about 8. Came up as an artist, got into games accidentally. We can talk about that later. And then from art to sort of art direction, design, and a bunch of different roles. And then moved around several times from Maryland down to California for a while. Now we're in Seattle area, and currently I am the co-founder, studio director at Outerloop Games, which we started about almost 5 years ago now.
Oh, wow. So thank you for that. And that's really cool. Starting at, such a young age and 25 years. So it sounds like this has kind of been your whole life basically in terms of working. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think other than a job at Costco and paper routes and things like that when I was younger, but like I think most of my adult life has been in making video games.
Well, that's really awesome. And 25 years, that's a long time. And I say that in the sense of like you'd have had such you would have seen so many different things come and go, and it's always wild to me getting to speak with people that have been doing it professionally for so long. Only because, like I said, the amount of exposure that you would have had, things you would have done or seen or what have you. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, that's been a lot of changes. A lot of different consoles throughout that time.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking in that way. So yeah, that is definitely a lot. Um, Yeah, so that's wild to start at Bethesda and moved on and bounced all over the place. And now, as you said, you're at Outerloop Games, the studio that you've co-founded and all of that fun stuff. Not to say that in a diminishing amount or way. And one of the things I think is really neat about, for my understanding at least, for the games that you are making or have made, Falcon Age and the upcoming Thirsty Suitors, is the focus on. I don't know if I'm going to phrase this right, so I apologize if I'm wrong. By all means, correct me. But the focus on like the unique cultural identity, and I say that in the sense of when you look at a lot of Western games, their focus is a Western audience. They're either made for or from a Western point of view or what have you. And I think it's really cool to see games that are intentionally putting you in a position of a entirely separate cultural view. I hope what I said makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean that's certainly our intention, is to make games that have themes that aren't explored as much in Western games. I mean, like I said, most of my life I've grown up in the U.S. and played a lot of games over the years, and it was fun to think about, what could I do as a studio? What could we do as a studio, and what kind of perspective can we bring? Um, and then kind of hitting on the cultural aspects of things, sort of like my history and some of the other folks in the studio. All our games are culmination of the people that work on things, and what our experiences, shared experiences. So, I mean, Falcon Age, it's even though it's a sci-fi game, there's a lot of sort of historical significance and texture that we brought in from, like imperialism in South Asia, things like that. Thematically, things that we thought could be turned into an interesting game or a backdrop for an interesting story. And then Thirsty Suitors, it's uh, queer brown game about fighting your exes and disappointing your parents. So there's a lot of like family drama and love and breakup and relationships and family pressure that we thought from a South Asian perspective that still I think could work, in a more universal way too. And you and I might have different upbringings, but I think there's a familiarity with sort of expectations from parents or expectations from a romantic partner and things like that that could be interested to explore in a game.
Yeah, definitely. And something you said that I think um, will resonate with a lot of people, and that was the disappointing your parents. And I don't think that is a culturally unique thing. Now,
Right.
arguably different metrics or what have you, but I think everyone can relate to being a huge disappointment to their parents in some way, shape, or form, which we don't really need to get into. But I think everyone can relate to that in some way.
There's something you want to tell me, Link?
Oh, I don't, I don't think I can afford you. I don't think I can afford the psychiatric bill it would take there. I'm sorry. No, no, no.
Uh,
I personally don't think I've really disappointed my parents too much. Um, but I've grown a lot as a person in in the 34 years. So I
nice,
would hope
nice.
at least the worst of it's behind me. I
Right.
think that's the safest and best thing to say.
There you go.
Now, Chandana, you had mentioned, that you've been doing this since 25 years, started, with art. Can you maybe elaborate on how you got into developing and making games? Like a
Sure.
little more on that?
Yeah, I mean, so this would be 96 when I started Bethesda. Before that, I went to art school in Savannah, Georgia. For a little short time, I didn't finish school. I had grown up always really into art, and I was the kid that's always like drawing on the bus or drawing in a classroom, or so I got into fine arts. And I remember specifically in high school, I was like, "Oh, I want to be an artist." And then I went to like our career center in high school, and I looked up like, what is the career like as an artist? And it's like, oh, this there isn't really a career as a fine artist. It's just a lot of luck and a lot of work. And it really depends on sort of the art market, the galleries, and there's a bunch of things. I was like, okay, well, I also like computers and games. Maybe there's some sort of digital art path. And at the time, video games as a career wasn't a thing I thought of. I mean, I played games, but I didn't make the connection there's actually people that make these games till much later. So I was thinking more like, oh, I'll go work on movie or TV effects because I like art and I like digital stuff, and that could be a possible career path. So I went to art school for that. But it's not what I was really passionate about, and so I came, I went to school for a little while. I came back home. A friend of mine's brother was going through architectural school in the DC area, and in their spare time, they were like building out 3D fly-throughs of spaces, which was like kind of novel at the time, because in '96, an architecture firm would would do a traditional painting of a building, and that's how they would like tell the client this is what it's going to look like. And at the time, my friend and his pals were just like building it out in 3D and then flying around it. So we started a studio, an animation studio. We had no idea what we were doing. They were like doing essentially design and animation and like 3D work for local architecture firms. And then I don't have an architectural background. They did, so I was doing a lot of the characters and video editing and sort of the other aspects of it. And um, we happened to send a VHS tape as a demo reel around the year we were doing this stuff, which we we didn't make any money. We spent a year working out of this house that we rented, and I just lived there. And in that year, I learned like everything I needed to know to kind of be a digital artist. So like how to do video editing, how to model in 3D, and how to do lighting and all that stuff. And Bethesda saw one of our tapes, and they hired us to be um, essentially they hired us to do a cinematic, like a cutscene for one of their games at the time. And that's how I got started at Bethesda.
So that's, to me, that's hilarious. And
Yeah,
because you're doing this architecture thing, you're setting it up for for demo or mock-up buildings or what have you,
yeah,
and it makes its way to Bethesda,
yeah,
who you wouldn't you wouldn't expect them to be like, oh hey, a real estate development kind of setup. You wouldn't expect them to be like, oh yeah, cool, cool. Let's put this in the in the VHS player in the tape
yeah,
deck and see what happens. So that's absolutely wild, and I absolutely love it just because the amount of disconnect between what you would assume those two industries, and it obviously wasn't as disconnected as you would think, right?
yeah. No, I mean, there's some like I think there weren't a whole lot of people doing sort of that thing, like so we had I had put in characters in these sort of architectural spaces, and we did like a fantastical kind of fantasy thing, which is I think what caught Bethesda's eye because they were at the time making a game called Battlespire. It's an Elder Scrolls, I think it's called Elder Scrolls Legends Battlespire, um, and they needed somebody to help with their sort of cinematics, so they hired us to. It was five of us. They hired us to do it. Then they hired us for another project that got canceled, but they're like, we should hire these guys. So they just hired the whole team. We were brought in house, like soon after a couple months of freelancing for them, and then we became Bethesda employees.
Like I said, that's just absolutely great. I'm
Mhm.
happy that worked out for you, just because how many like wild steps it was, to get from point A to point B, in the sense of these things should not be related. So
No,
I love it. So that's
totally,
absolutely
yeah,
wild.
yeah,
Now
totally unrelated.
now based on your experience, and I think this one's going to be, I don't know where this is going to go, but
Mhm.
based on the experience that you had, getting into the industry, is there any advice you could give to those looking to get into the industry as well?
Oh, this is tough because my path was so different than it is now. Um, and we've just hired somebody recently, and that's the sort of the way when I hire right now. It's like, what is the role we're looking for, and do they have an art station or do they have online portfolio, and do we think it can fit with what we're doing, and then we talk to them, and can they work remotely because the whole studio is remote. So I think past the technical know-how for the role, and really our studio we're 14 people, so we tend to hire generalists, people that can do sort of multiple things, like I do art and design, UI and trailer stuff, and some of our artists also do characters or lighting. Our producer, she does design work as well, so like when you have a small team at the size we're at, people that can kind of jump around where needed are the type of people that we tend to look for. And if you're in a bigger team, then you become more of a specialist, right? So like, oh, I am doing the character pipeline, or I'm doing the animation, just specifically thing. So I think advice would be depending on what type of role they're looking for. Um, if you like indie, smaller scale games and having sort of a breadth of work, or being able to jump around and do different things helps. AAA, it's more specialized.
So, thank you for that information. I understand where you're coming from at the beginning, because yeah, it's it would be very hard, I would imagine, to try and connect those dots based on where you came from. But that's great advice, so thank you, because the focus on, if you're applying to smaller teams, like you said, to be able to wear many hats, or be willing to wear many hats, versus a larger team where you can kind of get away with wearing one hat really well, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're doing more work. It just means you're shifting around more on a smaller team.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because that
Yeah,
makes perfect sense.
yeah. It's just because on a bigger team, the number of assets and number of levels and how long it think to build takes a lot longer. So you need a lot more people doing it. Where the scale of sort of like our games are much smaller, so it's not as much content to build.
Definitely, and again, thank you, because that makes perfect sense, and I hope anyone that hears that is, not as scared, or I'm just gonna go scared of a position that might, be presented as such, because I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that a lot of people worry about, regardless of the industry, but that being skilled in a lot of different places might mean they're going to do a lot of different jobs that maybe shouldn't be a lot, like should maybe be split up or what have you. But sometimes it's not exactly meaning you're going to be doing like 80 hours a week. It's just 40
No.
hours a week all over the place, right?
Yeah, and we're actually 32 hours a week. We're a 4 day studio.
Oh, that's that's fantastic to hear.
Mm.
Just
Yeah, I
from a
should also.
standpoint.
Oh yeah, I should also mention that it doesn't mean coming out of school that you need to know every aspect of game development, right? That's not a realistic expectation. It's like, most people have a sort of a thing they like to do, whether it's characters or environments, or I'm a programmer, or design, or it just means that if you understand the other aspects of game development, that's really useful in a smaller setting. Not that you have to be able to do every single aspects of it really well. So.
Thank you, because that also makes a lot of sense. Because I've spoken with people, and one of the things that I've heard from other people is they they value people that can see the bigger picture, or they value people that are able to learn or take into consideration many other
Yep.
things. So
Mhm.
that's thank you for clarifying, because again, that makes perfect sense, and hopefully, hearing that kind of stuff makes people feel less scared of the daunting task of stepping into the work world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
So Chandana, I am curious, what is or what was, you're as you said, you're a little older than me, so I don't think is correct, but what was your favorite game as a child, and what was it about that game that made it your favorite?
Oh, so um, there's two that I remember playing a ton of because at the time we had an NES, right? And I think the first game we got was obviously Mario Brothers, but like Metroid soon after, and Legend of Zelda, the original one, Legend of Zelda. And I remember just spending so much time. I was really drawn to the world and storytelling and like exploration, and the curiosity of those games. Um, both of those just did it in a slightly different way, but like um, I remember like with Metroid, I remember playing it over and over again, trying to get different endings. And Zelda was just exploring and just replaying the segments over and over and over again. So those were definitely like I think I was like 8 or 9 when those came out. Um, and I like those really stuck with me, or you still are definitely stuck with me to this day too. So
And that those are both great games. I'm not gonna try and lie. The both of those games creating genre-defining, long-lasting series and everything. I'm curious, did Metroid and Zelda have they remained, favorites for you, or did you find other things as you got older?
yeah, I think I from that on, like I think I'll tell you it's the game that wanted it's the game that made me want to start making games is Full Throttle, and that's a LucasArts Tim Schafer adventure game, point and click adventure game. Um, that really I'm really drawn to like storytelling and cinematics and sort of linear approaches to storytelling in games medium, and how characters are framed and how the dialogue is delivered and those kind of things. And Full Throttle blew my mind because that was like one of the first adventure games where like there was cinematic moments, right? Like the camera would get in tighter for a dialogue and things like that, which typically point and click adventure was like the camera didn't shift, right? It was just looking at a game view and then there's a dialogue box. Um, Full Throttle had a really nice style to it and cinematic flavor, so that, and I was like, oh, this is neat. I like this stuff. So there's people that actually make this thing. Maybe I can do that too. So
And that's awesome to hear. I personally did not. I missed out on LucasArts games, and I only say that because my father mostly played Sierra games, and by the
hmm
nature of how that typically goes, I only really was exposed to Sierra games.
right.
But I had a bunch of friends that played LucasArts games, and from hearing about them then, and hearing about them now when I look into them and such, it always fascinates me how the two games, or the two studios, companies, what have you, always did such different things, but
Hmm.
still influenced everything in such a fantastic way.
Yeah.
And just kind of jumping off of that, with the market, or I shouldn't say the market, with there not seeming to be a lot of point and click games coming as they used to.
Hmm.
Um, is there any point and click games that you've seen recently, or the last few years, or what have you, that made you feel, remember the feeling you did when you first played Full Throttle or other games like that?
Oh, I think the genres have shifted, right, over the years. Because I remember playing while I was working at Bethesda. Grim Fandango came out, right, and I was playing that, and then soon after, Half-Life One came out, and that just completely just like upended or blew my mind because I started playing that. I never went back to to Grim Fandango. The storytelling and sort of the perspective change and sort of the AI of Half-Life, I was like, I've never played anything like this before. Um, Especially because since it kind of took the first person shooter sort of, the Dooms, which also I spent a lot of time playing, but added its element of sort of in-camera storytelling. And that's just like, oh, it was amazing. So like, but back to your question, I don't think I was at that point. I think I played so many point and click adventure games that I was kind of like, I think I'm done with this. Sort of, there's limitations to the type of stories and type of gameplay and mechanics and pacing you can do with point and click. I did I did really enjoy Broken Age though when that was a thing several years ago. Um, Double Fine's take on it. But I think the point and clicks have changed into third person adventure games, like action adventure games.
So I'm just to clarify for myself, really.
Hmm.
Are you meaning more in the sense of like that's where the hard story driven what have yous have went,
Yeah,
or
I feel like people are more open to playing third person single player games than they are point and click games. And there's more sort of from a market perspective, those games do better. And the production values and going to 3D, I think, like take a God of War, it's considered an adventure game and an action game, but also has RPG elements, and cinematics and things. So it's like the genres have kind of evolved into, um, you know, with the advent of sort of 3D engines and 3D tech, like a lot of, most games are in sort of 3D. Like the games we make are in 3D. So like, but seeing things like Psychonauts too, that's probably the closest thing to the feeling of playing one of those older games. Just like the character development, storytelling, even though mechanically it's completely different.
and thank you, because all that makes perfect sense. From the standpoint of where the where the heavy story driven games have went, or what they kind of evolved into.
Mhm.
Because like I get exactly what you're saying, because back then, uh you only had so much space, so much room, or what have
Mhm.
you, however you want to phrase it.
Yeah.
And you kind of had to give up A to get B, or B to get C, or what have you. And the point and clicks, when their heavy focus, their simplicity in their design and their gameplay, allowed more focus on the story driven aspects, or the larger scripts, or what have you.
Mhm.
But with the advent of the 3D games, 3D like action adventure games, or what have you, where they were given more space and were allowed to have more room to play with the stories and such. I get what you're saying, and that's absolutely correct, or not. I shouldn't, not that way. Um, like, I think I absolutely agree that that's a good way to look at it, and I hadn't looked at it that way before. So thank you.
Yeah, I think I would say maybe the closer thing to point and click is probably the Telltale style of games, where it's mechanically not as heavy, but they're more character moments.
Yes, and I understand what you're saying there. For me personally, I think you're going to be just a little too old for the reference I'm going to make.
Mhm.
Um, but for whatever reason, to me, the Telltale games always felt more in line with. Do you remember if you played them? Do you remember those like interactive storybook games? I
Yeah.
played like Arthur was one of the ones that I was first introduced to these with, and it
Hmm.
was like a normal storybook or whatever book,
Yeah.
and it would read it to you, and you could go back and forth and have it word by word because it was a teaching thing. But you could also like click around the environment and make certain things happen, but ultimately you were really just pushing the buttons to make the next page happen.
I see. Yeah.
And I don't say that in an insulting way to the Telltale games. That's just how I always thought of them in my mind.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, so I never really connected them to or as heavily to the point and click genre, even though they are. It's just sorry, I'm kind of
Yeah.
rambling
No.
away
No.
at something.
No. Sure. But point and click also had a lot of puzzles, right? Like combining items, and there was more sort of like, okay, I need to solve this thing. I need to go to these locations, get these items. Oh, to get these items, I need to like talk to this person or do this thing, and then put it all together. So there's definitely a lot of more puzzle solving than, I think you're right, than like a Telltale Walking Dead type game.
Yeah, and just to briefly touch on what you said, if you're the King's Quest series, it would have been making you get item A and then have five different chances to use it in such a way that would hard lock you out of progressing just to annoy the hell out of you, right?
Yeah, I played the Sierra games too. I played Police Quest, King's Quest, yeah, Space Quest.
Yeah, that's not something I miss in games. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
And now, Chandana, I am curious because based on what you said, your favorite games were as a child, and where we kind of went, went from there. What is it that makes gaming enjoyable to you now?
Making games?
No,
Uh,
what
oh,
like
gaming.
what?
Oh.
Yeah, like what you enjoy about games now? Sorry.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm really happy with where games are is there's a lot of different sort of, the term game gets stretched, it's stretched out to like, I'm a huge fan of sort of genre mashing. Um, One of my favorite games from this past year was Unpacking, right? It's a game about unpacking. Um, and mechanically, you have a room, and then you click on a box, and you take an item out, and you put it somewhere, right? So it's very like, it's a pretty pixel game. It's But there's a whole narrative to whose space is this? What is my character? What's the story beyond that? And you get all that through context, through contextual clues, and how much space you have, and then like what part of her life are we seeing this in? Because it kind of is a progression of someone from like teenage to adulthood, and like breakups, and all through just unpacking items. So I don't know what kind of genre that is. I guess that's an adventure game, but you know.
I- Sorry, I'm thinking heavily.
Hmm.
I don't know what kind of game that would be.
Yeah. So
Um,
like, it's a narrative game, right? And I
well,
I
yes.
really enjoy that. And then I'm at the same time I'm playing, I'm like 50 hours into Elden Ring, and it's blowing my mind. Like, it's such a huge game, and I feel like I barely, maybe 10% in. Um and there's so much sort of variety and pacing that if a boss is too hard, and I'm not a huge Souls game fan, but this game definitely hooked me because it's got a bit of the Breath of the Wild exploration aspect to it. It's open world, and you can just go to wherever you. If you're having trouble in one area, you just go somewhere else and explore. Um, and that has so many mechanics, right? Like, you have a game like Unpacking where it's just one mechanic done really well with a small team, and you have a game like Elden Ring where it's like a 300 person plus team, and there's a deep, deep RPG mechanic and systems and classes and boss fights and progression and story, and the story is all within sort of conveyed through items and characters that you meet. So yeah, I mean that's like the range of sort of what is a game these days. Is I'm really enjoying that aspect of it. It means a whole lot, and I'm really drawn to storytelling, and that doesn't just mean single player games. There's like multiplayer games that do a great job of sort of establishing and storytelling, and there's like these little games like Unpacking and big games like Elden Ring, and it's really fascinating.
And thank you, because it's always great to hear. And something you touched on, that about Elden Ring specifically, uh, that you weren't really a big Soulsborne fan or what have you, and it's something that's hooking you so well. And I think that's absolutely fantastic, because me personally, I'm touch and go with the Souls games. I've played, I want to say I played all of them. I'm not particularly good at them.
Right, right.
And one of my biggest concerns with Elden Ring was going to be more of the same. And I mean that in the sense of, it was going to be more of the same enemies that had the chance to one hit you, and you were going to be locked into you're going to hit a wall or what have you.
Right.
And hearing that in this one, it's much easier just to go, nah, I don't think I want to go down that hallway. There's a closed door, and you can just go the other way.
Mm.
And hearing about all the people that, are not Soulsborne fans having such a blast with it
Yeah.
is fantastic to me, because one, I know heavily where the inspiration for these games comes from,
Mhm.
and I'm a huge fan of that source work.
Right.
So that's all a huge thing for me, just to be able to enjoy as well. But knowing that if and when I pick this game up, I shouldn't say if eventually, but when
Mhm.
I pick this game up, I'm not going to feel as going down a hallway and hitting a hard wall and whatnot.
Yeah.
Makes me feel good. And also, like I said, it makes me feel good or happy to know that there's lots of other people that are getting to experience these games without as much stress or feeling, completely locked down as you would have in the earlier titles. That something that I definitely felt, and I don't think I'm unique in that feeling, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, totally. I played I think the most in Dark Souls 1, a bit of 2, bit of Demon Souls on PS5, but I kind of bounced off all of those. Well, this is definitely the one I've played the most. The other thing is there's enough checkpoints where even if you die to a boss fight, you're not losing a whole lot at all. So there's a lot of sort of um, ways to keep playing or not get too frustrated where you bounce off of it. So,
And like I said, that it's I'm happy that that's kind of where they've went with it. And I know that there's a lot of discourse about other things. I don't really have any interest in picking your brain on that, and I don't think you really have any interest in jumping in on that, because it's a whole thing that I don't think a lot of people like, the can of worms that's open just for the headache of it all.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
it's nice to know that it is a game that appears to be more accessible to people that might not have enjoyed the older games formula, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Sure. And I think that's you're seeing a result of it because the amount of sales it's doing, it's like the second best selling thing this year or this last year. It's yeah, a lot of people are playing it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also a good sign, because
Mm.
it means that they might continue to make more games like that that'll be more appealing to people that weren't as huge fans as the older games, but are definitely fans of that approach, just not the less open worldy bit.
Right, 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 right. Yeah. I don't think I've been hooked on a game recently as much as hate. I think Hades was the last game that I got this hooked on a game.
Which was also a fantastic game, if I do say so myself.
So amazing. Yeah, they do great work.
Yes, it's absolutely bananas how consistent they are, and how how each game is seemingly like a different genre, if you will, or what have you, or
Hmm.
different mechanics or whatnot, and they seem to just nail it every time.
Yeah.
That always is just something that has been wild to me, how good they are. There's very few companies personally that I would see making a game or making, what have you, and just go, yeah, I know I'm gonna, like, I'm willing to say it's gonna be fine,
Oh,
you know?
totally. That's a handful of companies I can think of, and Supergiant's top of my list there because they just been doing it so consistently for 10 plus years now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're one of the companies that if they released a game that didn't hit, you would legitimately have to go, no, no, everyone else has to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
So
Totally.
Chandana, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're good. Sorry.
So Chandana, I did want to ask this, and it's a bit of a newer question, so I don't know if it will hit land or what have you exactly. But outside of games, what other hobbies do you have and things do you enjoy doing?
Yeah, so I have two teenage sons. So outside of games, we spend a lot of time with their various sports. One's a runner, and one other one plays basketball, football. I also coach. So we're just about to start flag football season in the spring with my younger son and a team of boys that I've been coaching since they were, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago now. So um, I spent time with my wife. We watched, and we were watching. What are we watching as a family? We've been watching Haikyuu recently. It's a anime about volleyball. Um, yeah, I mean the kids take up a lot of time in between work. So I'd say that, and we live a part of Washington where there's a lot of wine tasting. So that's our my wife and I spend time wine tasting.
Yeah, all of those things fantastic to hear.
Yeah,
I've only ever been wine tasting once, so I'm not an expert on talking about that.
yeah.
I think the most notable thing when I went that I can say is I got a nice pin that said "Talk cheese to me, baby," because it was absolutely hilarious. But that's the
Nice.
only real wine tasting thing I can relate to.
Yeah.
Um, but the other things I'm well equipped, well, kind of well equipped to talk about or ask more about, really, maybe.
Uh-huh.
Maybe not so much the sports thing. I've never coached, but I imagine that's a blast because it gives you something to do with your kids that is, um, and I don't know how to phrase this right, and I apologize if it offends any parents or what have you, but it gives you something that you can be involved in, but not like it's participating involving. And by
Hmm.
that I mean like I played sports as a child, and
Yeah.
obviously my mother would go out and watch me play baseball, but she was really there um, with a family friend, and it's a thing you just watch, and
Right.
you don't care 90% of the time until your child is accidentally catching a baseball on the side of the head or what have you.
Yeah.
Um, that wasn't me. That was actually a friend of mine.
Oof.
Yeah, it was a fun time for him. He had to go to the hospital and
Ouch.
luckily didn't lose an eye. Um, that's
Oh,
far
good.
closer to the truth than it should be. But anyway, um, but I mean, if you're helping coach it, you're there. You're getting to spend time with your kids while also doing something and not just passively being there, right?
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
imagine that's fantastic.
It is, and I'm a big sports fan, so we watch football together and basketball together and things. So.
And that's great to hear. And uh, I I being a huge fan of anime, um, which may or may not, for other people aren't going to really have a reference to this, but based on my uh, emoticon or what have you, I don't think that's a secret.
Hmm.
Um, and I did want to ask about this just because it seemed like uh, you were just starting your Gundam journey, and I was
Yes.
curious how that was going for you.
Oh my goodness. I so the original Gundams I didn't see. The original there's like three movies, 6 hours, 2 hours each. 1979 Gundam 1, 2, and 3. I guess. I tried to see those before, but I didn't have a way to get to them. I mean, they were like rip versions on YouTube that were like half translated or anyway, not good quality. So I had watched some other Gundam shows, and but I'd never had seen the source, sort of the original ones, and that just blew my mind. I was completely taken. Um, I'm kind of trying to picture myself when this would come out, and it came out in '79. This is like a reaction to other robot animes with an anti-war message, um, and really about the sort of like showing the different aspects of war and how brutal it can be and how it affects people's lives and like very surprised. I mean, I knew those were the themes, but like I just was impressed how well they handled it for a show that's made in '79.
You know, with the Universal Century for Gundam, a good chunk of it is very much on theme with that. And if you, I'm no historian, so I can't really say a lot with absolute confidence. But given Japan's history and their views on war and the obvious fallout,
Mhm.
pun unintended there, and everything, it lines up real well. And yeah, it goes hard if you look into it more, or if you go beyond just I'm going to call it the supercut, because it was something that was originally 49 episodes condensed down into 3 6-hour movies,
Mhm.
or 3 movies, 6 hours
6
combined.
hours. Yep.
So there's obviously a lot of stuff that's missed, but even then, in the original series, in those movies, they really stress what they're trying to show, and
Yeah.
it's absolutely wild. And further UC stuff has kind of eased up a little bit,
Mhm.
um, only because only because in some ways they wanted to make the series as more palpable for selling toys.
Yep.
Um,
And the toys
but
are cool, but yeah.
yes, exactly, the toys are cool, um, but one of the other big reasons it cooled down a little bit is Tomino, the original creator of Gundam. He worked on other things prior to that I don't remember the exact names for. But Tomino, the original author of Gundam, and Zeta and etc., Charged Counterattack, etc., etc., he stopped going by the name Kill 'Em All Tomino, and that that doesn't mean his series became less dark. It just he stopped killing everyone, so it kind of didn't hit as hard, but it still, he still was hitting as hard as he could with it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I also really identify with it is the risk, you know. Is this character going to be around? I'm like, are they going to die? Like they killed off a lot of characters in those condensed 6 hours. I was just surprised. Um because it's typically, you watch shows, it's like, okay, no, we'll tease you with this. And you think this character dies, but they miraculously survive because ratings and we got the show got picked up for another reason. We got now what do we do, right? Like there's all these sort of formulas for whether it's a show or a movie or for a non-limited series. Like how do you tease the audience and keep it engaged, but also you can't kill off all the characters.
Yes, exactly. And, back then, like you said, you just sort of watch wondering, is this person going to make it? And more often than not, they definitely didn't.
Right.
I don't know how much of the Universal Century how far you've gotten in it, but I can say this: in the original novels for Gundam, he actually full on, kills off Amuro relatively early into the third act.
Oh
And
wow. Okay.
yeah, yeah, and it's absolutely wild that he did that and then kept going, right? And it's just his penchant for using deaths as a with meaning. It wasn't like, rarely did he just kill someone for the sake of killing them off. There was, I think one of the things that he said that I always found great for storytelling in general was he didn't want to kill a character until he was, now at least, like, years after he's, as he put it, he got out of his dark space and like went to therapy or what have you. Um, but what he had said was he was against killing people now until he was absolutely certain their story was finished, and he never really knew when their story was finished.
Oh,
So
interesting.
if you watch some of his later works, you'll notice that the amount of people dying, and when I say his lyrics, I mean like actually directed by him and what have you, the amount of people that he kills off goes down very much like to almost non-existent. Like as the years went on, he stopped just killing people off, at the drop of a hat.
That's really interesting.
Now, I unintentionally went to a little too dark of a place maybe there. So I did also want to quickly to mention or to talk about, so you're also experiencing other things with your family, your boys,
Mm.
which you mentioned Haiku. How is that doing for you? Only because I'm a huge fan of Haiku. I really enjoyed it. And I'm just curious how you guys are enjoying it.
Oh, so I had blasted through 4 seasons of it on my own, and I'm reading the manga, season 5, because I couldn't wait. So I introduced it to my wife, who doesn't watch a lot of anime. So we actually started with Naruto for her. Went through all of Naruto, and then we switched to Shippuden, and we're at the end of Shippuden, and I was like, okay, you got to watch Haikyuu. Is it, how do you pronounce it?
I've always pronounced it like Haiku, but
Haikyuu. Okay.
I
Yeah.
have no idea.
All right.
Don't use me as the benchmark.
So she was like, none of us are huge volleyball fans, but and that's the thing I really, really love about the show is the storytelling and how dramatic they take this game that we don't, like I'll watch a volleyball match, but it's not something I go after, like to find on TV or record or whatever. But it's the people drama, right? Like it's the characters and their situations and what they try to do as a team, like all the sort of the things I love about sports drama and watching live games and even fictional stories like Friday Night Lights. All that stuff is in that show. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you touched on, that's about the human drama and whatnot. One of one of my favorite episodes, and you've seen it, so you know exactly what I'm going to be talking about. But one of my favorite episodes is uh, the episode where he's the main character, Shoryu. I believe it's been a while. Is having a dream, and in his dream, it's more akin to just what you'd expect from a sports anime series. And in that series, like the non-dream, like they have stupid names for some of their things that they do, and it's just them screwing around and having fun. And a few of them are, when they say their special move name, everyone else is in the room, asking them why they're so stupid, or what have you. But in his dream, everyone's doing this, and they end up fighting like a giant. One person turns into an octopus or something, but
Yeah,
I absolutely loved that the series outright called that, like you did that, and basically just called it as just a dumb dream sequence because of just how absurd it is. Um, but I always loved that kind of series for the same reason that you mentioned. That's it's the sports is sort of the car that's just taking everyone to the destination. Everything else around it is the people inside of the vehicle, right?
exactly. Yeah,
Uh,
no, it totally. And like I love how they deal with loss, right? That's one of the reasons I love sports for kids and why I like coaching is you learn to deal with losing and how to deal with that and how to have a short memory and forget it and move on to the next game. Like, don't let it consume you where like because you know how good it wins. So like when you lose, um, you understand what you need to do. And when you finally do win or win one game or whatever, it just feels it's such a good feeling. And I think it's what I really love about the anime too, because they don't always win every season, right? Like they're like these underdogs, and they're fighting an uphill battle against these much better teams, and that's always interesting to me.
Definitely, and that's you're right, and that's something I forgot, and just how well it handles that and emphasizes, you know, the loss and how it's not the end of the world, and that you have to pick up and carry on, but just in how it tackles it and how all of the characters in their own ways bounce back from it, right?
Totally, yeah.
Now, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, I do want to make a quick recommendation for you, just based on if you enjoyed Haikyuu. There's another series that I've really enjoyed in my past, and it's called Cross Game. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Cross game.
yeah. So like crossing the street and then game.
Okay.
Um, it's a baseball series, but it's the car is baseball
Okay.
basically,
Yeah.
and it's uh effectively it's a series about dealing with loss. And I'm going to spoil the first couple of episodes because
That's
it's
fine.
literally just walking to the car at this point.
Yeah.
But the series is based around someone that lives like a family friend, and it's the main character, I believe his name's Ko, and he's friends with uh like the family down the street. It's the family has four girls, one older, one that's born like the same year as him, one that's younger than him by a year or so, and then a much younger girl. And the first few episodes is setting up this whole thing about the character that's his age, about how oh yeah, as typically does with families that are family friends and such, that they set up, oh, they're going to be boyfriend girlfriend, what have you. And then tragically the one girl passes away, and she passes away doing something heroic, saving another person's life and what have you. But the rest of the series is effectively Ko trying to honor this girl's wishes and how he interacts with the family as they're also trying to work through the burden of having a child pass away at such a young age.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So it's a relatively heavy, the over arc is heavy, and a lot of the other things that happen in it are fantastically dealt with. But if you are up for it, I would strongly recommend it as a sports show, being the car and everything else, because the way they handle everything is fantastic. And it's a series that whenever anyone mentions enjoying Haikyuu, that I kind of feel the compulsion to be like, well, you might also like this. So I just want to throw that out there because, like I said, it's a fantastic series and I love recommending it to people.
That's awesome. I'm watching a show about Japanese bread making now. It's an older anime. What was it called?
Yakuta Japan, I think,
Yes, yes.
because the name's a pun on Japan or what have
Uh-huh.
you.
Yeah,
I
Japan. Yeah.
Yeah, I never personally watched it myself. I was always aware of it. The name, absolutely hilarious to me.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm gonna
anyway,
I'm gonna add Cross Game to my list on Crunchyroll. Yeah, I'm
if
sure it's
it's
on there.
I don't know for certain. It might be coming with the acquisition or the final merger of Funimation and whatnot.
Hmm.
So I don't know where you would find it easily. However, if you can find it, I personally would recommend it, just because, like I said, it's absolutely fantastic, and it does really well, in my opinion, of dealing with a whole lot of trauma effectively, because it's everyone is dealing with it, and it's fantastic in my opinion.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Now, as I said, Chandana, I don't want to keep you for too much longer. However, if there was anything else you want to discuss, maybe a cool game, what you guys are doing, something you feel more people should be aware of, the floor is yours. As well as please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which will also be including in the episode description.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, we're busy finishing up Thirsty Suitors, which is our turn-based combat game with cooking and skateboarding and fight. It's a game about battling your exes and trying to trying to repair relationships thematically. So, and has a it's set in a real world setting in the 90s in a small town in Washington we made up, but it's has a fantastical, almost anime like elements. Like we play with surreal elements when you go into battles and like these action packed cooking sequences and things. So we're it's coming together, and we're happy to we're excited to have people play it when it's out at some point. Um, other than that, Outerloop Games is at Outerloop Games on Twitter, or Outerloop Games, Outerloop Games.com. I'm usually can be reached on Twitter at Ekanaut, Ekanaut. Yeah, that's everything.
Awesome, and thank you for that. And there, if you have a few more moments, there was something I had meant to ask earlier, and I apologize, I forgot to ask. If you have a few minutes, I'd like to keep you just a minute longer.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, when you guys were sitting down and thinking of Thirsty Suitors, and I hope I'm not offending when I'm simplifying this or what have you, but how many people in the room went, we can make a Scott Pilgrim game?
So it wasn't. It was interesting because the X's sort of thing didn't come till later in production. But Scott Pilgrim was definitely an influence for us. Because I think I like the idea of tackling relationships, and that's a and also like making it visually interesting because we like visual flair, and that's some of the things we do a lot with. So that movie definitely, I think, thematically is really interesting and visually interesting. Um, yeah, originally we were thinking like Bollywood meets Scott Pilgrim sort of as a vibe, and that's where things usually start. Like, oh, we kind of like this, and until we kind of get its own thing. Because in sort of how there has been a Scott Pilgrim game, right? There was like a pixel art game years ago, um, which I think was more of a traditional brawler. So our approach to combat is more of like turn-based combat with conversations in the middle of it. So I think it'll play very different than what people are used to, hopefully. So
Yeah, and I do want to stress that wasn't meant to be any kind of shot or a dig or
oh
what
no,
have you.
no, I think the comparison is apt, just on a sort of a surface level, like, oh, a story about finding X's, right? That's what Scott Pilgrim is about. Or well, with Scott's case, he has to fight his girlfriend's exes, but so we're a little different there, but it's very similar thematically.
Yeah, exactly. It's the vehicle, if you will, in some way, shape, or
Hmm.
form.
Yeah.
And I I mean this no offense as well, but when you guys first showed off Thirsty Suitors, I I was very much into the camp that was constantly saying, "What is this game and what am I looking at?"
Sure.
And I I like as it's discussed more or what have you, or um, kind of accepting it more, I guess,
Mm.
in that it's such a fantastically you know uh, wild mishmash of certain things. Like I said, I don't mean that in a negative way. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
cooking, the skateboarding, the way that the battles kind of go out, and
Hmm.
the relationships and everything. I think it's seeing all of that kind of come together or what have you, to me is absolutely fantastic. Just because, I and again, I don't, I just like prefacing this always because I'm always worried. But when it first was announced, I was like, well, I don't know exactly how this appeals to me in the sense of, I don't know if this is really a me thing. And then the more you learn about it or the more you accept about it, for me personally, the more I've realized just how absolutely fantastic it sounds. Just the everything that it is just seems like such a wild and fun ride. And I I really hope that it is accepted in that way, only because, like I said, I noticed when it was first announced that there was a lot of people saying, "What is this?" or
Yeah,
trying
no.
to fully understand it. And I'm hoping that more people, maybe like me, that were like, "I don't know what this is. I don't know if this is for me," come to realize just how wild this game probably is going to be in such a like a fantastic way. Like I said, just from all of the pieces, for me, it sounds like it's going to be absolutely wild and awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that was intentional, right? And the biggest reaction we got is, "This is cool. What the heck is it?" And that's completely okay because we didn't show a lot of sort of how it works. The important thing for us was getting the theme and story sort of set up across. And then sort of the next time we reveal something, you'll definitely see more gameplay, and you'll get a sense of, okay, that's how it plays. And so yeah, that was intentional because it's hard trying to cram too much information into one trailer, right? So we were like, let's just focus on theme, tone, the humor, the visuals, and setting up who Jala is. And that's, if people came across like, what the heck is it? That's perfect. That means they cared, or they were at least interested, and we got their attention. We got their attention, which is hard to do these days, right? Getting folks to pay attention to something is really hard.
Exactly. And I hope that the amount of conversation that came from people trying to figure it out was able to sell more people on it. Because, like I said, it took me a few watches of the trailer or whatnot to be fully committed to it, and I am incredibly happy that I was able to get to that position. Again, I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't mean that in any negative way, but like I said, I love what I'm seeing from it. Sorry, I've just been having the trailer playing just as I've been saying all this, just to remind myself of some of it.
Right.
And I look forward to it because it just looks like it's going to be a blast. I think
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
really the end of what I'm trying to get at there.
no,
I'm
totally.
sorry.
It's a genre mashing game, so like we're mixing a bunch of different things, and if we do our job right, all that stuff will make sense when you play the game.
Yeah, and just seeing someone throw a ephemeral, I guess you would say, vehicle at someone, um, I'm on board just to see how that plays out. To be to be honest, I kind of want to know more about that, and I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to seeing whatever that is happening and the context of how that works.
yeah, totally.
But you know what, Chandana, as I said, I didn't want to take up too much more of your time. So if there wasn't anything else you wanted to discuss or, you know, throw out there, I will let you get to your Friday afternoon or evening, however you want to phrase it at this point.
Oh yeah, totally. No, this has been great. I hope we got to cover all the things we wanted to cover. I think we kind of went, anime and Gundam and, went around, which is fine. But I think we covered most of the things.
Well, I'm always happy covering whatever we cover.
Mhm.
If there was something that you wanted to cover more so, 100%, I'm more than happy to cover that with you or go down that path. But, if from my end, I'm always, I've said this joke before privately, but I'm kind of like a dog going to the dog park. I'm
Yeah,
just happy to go to the dog park and get to have a fun and cool conversation with a developer, someone in the industry, just because one of the things that I really like to focus on is, talking to you as a person, talking to developers as people and who they are, where they are, all that fun stuff. And, so for me, it's not so much getting through all the questions, because all the questions in my mind are just ways to have or get started on potentially interesting conversation points. So, for me, I'm always happy with wherever we end up, and it's, if you're happy with it, then I'm even happier.
oh yeah. This has been fun. I'm good. So
Awesome.
thank
Well,
you.
thank you for that. I'm happy that, you enjoyed yourself.
Totally.
However, Chandana, as I said, if there's nothing else, I am definitely going to let you get going. I don't want to keep you here too much longer, let you get to your Friday evening or what have you.
Awesome.
So
Well, thank you.
yeah, so thanks again, Chandana, for making time to have this conversation with me. And thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news, and be sure to share it with those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks, and until next time.